The morning mist clung to Riverside Settlement like a shroud, its tendrils weaving between the weathered buildings that lined the muddy main street. Dr. Jonathan Hayes pressed his face against the grimy window of his clinic, watching the first rays of sunlight struggle through the gloom. His breath fogged the glass as he sighed, the weight of sleepless nights evident in the dark circles beneath his eyes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The settlement had seen better days. Once a thriving river port where steamboats regularly docked to trade goods and passengers, Riverside now bore the scars of economic collapse. The Great Fire of 1847 had destroyed the main warehouse district, and the subsequent rerouting of the railway 20 miles south had sealed the town's fate. What remained was a collection of stubborn souls, too proud to abandon their homes and too poor to start elsewhere. Dr. Hayes understood that stubbornness intimately. He had arrived in Riverside 5 years ago, fresh from his medical training in Philadelphia, with grand plans to establish a modern practice. The reality had proven far harsher than his idealistic expectations. Most of his patients paid with vegetables, eggs, or promises they couldn't keep. His medical supplies dwindled with each passing month, and the nearest city where he could purchase more lay 3 days' hard ride through increasingly dangerous territory. The sound of wagon wheels on cobblestones drew his attention back to the street. A procession of vehicles wound its way toward the town square, their occupants huddled against the morning chill. Today was auction day, a monthly event that had become both a necessity and spectacle in Riverside. Families who could no longer sustain themselves would offer their labor, their possessions, sometimes even their freedom in exchange for basic survival. Dr. Hayes had witnessed these auctions before, each one leaving him with a profound sense of helplessness. As a physician, he had sworn an oath to heal and protect, yet he watched families torn apart by circumstances beyond their control while he struggled to keep his own practice afloat. The irony wasn't lost on him that a man dedicated to saving lives found himself unable to save the very community he served. He pulled his worn coat from its hook by the door and stepped into the crisp morning air. The smell of wood smoke and dampness filled his nostrils as he made his way toward the square. Perhaps Mrs. Garrett would be there with news of her husband's condition, or maybe young Tommy Morrison would need his arm examined again. These small interactions, these moments of genuine healing, kept him anchored to his purpose, even when everything else seemed futile. The town square bustled with activity despite the early hour. Makeshift stalls displayed everything from handmade furniture to livestock, while clusters of people examined the goods with the careful attention of those who understood the value of every penny. At the center of it all stood the auction platform, a raised wooden structure that had once been used for political speeches and community celebrations. Now it served a more somber purpose. Auctioneer Benjamin Clark, a rotund man with a voice that could carry across 3 counties, was already setting up his equipment. His assistant, a nervous young man named Pete, arranged papers and counted coins with the meticulous attention of someone who knew that accuracy could mean the difference between a family eating or going hungry. "Morning, Doc," called out Martha Stevenson from her position near the platform. The settlement's unofficial organizer of community affairs, Martha kept track of who needed what and who might be able to provide it. Her weathered hands sorted through a stack of notices while her sharp eyes missed nothing that happened around her. "Good morning, Martha," Dr. Hayes replied, tipping his hat respectfully. "Busy day ahead?" Martha's expression grew somber. "More than usual, I'm afraid. The Henderson family—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Well, you'll see for yourself soon enough." Before Dr. Hayes could inquire further, a commotion near the edge of the square caught his attention. A small crowd had gathered around a wagon that had just arrived. their voices carrying a mixture of sympathy and morbid curiosity. Through the gaps between onlookers, he caught glimpses of four figures huddled together on the wagon's bed, the Henderson family. Dr. Hayes had heard whispers about their situation over the past few weeks. Robert Henderson had been a skilled carpenter until a falling beam crushed his leg, leaving him unable to work. His wife, Margaret, had tried to support the family by taking in washing, but with their eldest daughter falling ill and medical expenses mounting, they had fallen deeper and deeper into debt. As the crowd parted slightly, Dr. Hayes got his first clear look at the family that would soon be offered for auction. Robert Henderson sat with his damaged leg extended, his face a mask of barely controlled shame and desperation. Beside him, his wife Margaret clutched their youngest child, a boy who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Their daughter, perhaps 14, sat rigidly upright, her young face already marked by the kind of premature maturity that came from witnessing too much hardship too soon. But it was their middle child that captured Dr. Hayes's attention most completely. A boy of perhaps 10 years old, he possessed an alertness in his eyes that spoke of intelligence and curiosity despite their current circumstances. Even in this moment of family crisis, the child's gaze moved constantly, taking in details, processing information, storing away observations with the natural instinct of someone born to learn. Dr. Hayes felt something tighten in his chest as he watched the family. In his years of medical practice, he had developed an ability to read people, to see beyond surface presentations to the core of who they were. What he saw in the Henderson family wasn't just desperation or defeat. Despite their circumstances, despite the shame and fear that clearly weighed upon them, there remained an undercurrent of dignity, of love, of determination to protect one another, even in the face of impossible odds. The auction began with smaller items, household goods, tools, livestock. Each sale was conducted with business-like efficiency, but Dr. Hayes could feel the tension building as the crowd anticipated the day's main event. When Benjamin Clark finally called for the Henderson family to step forward, a hush fell over the assembly. Robert Henderson struggled to his feet, his wife helping him navigate the uneven ground with his injured leg. The children followed, the eldest maintaining her composure, while the youngest clung to his mother's skirt. The 10-year-old boy walked with measured steps, his chin raised slightly in what Dr. Hayes recognized as an act of conscious courage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Clark announced, his voice carrying easily across the square, "we have before us the Henderson family. Robert Henderson, skilled carpenter and general laborer, though currently limited by injury. Margaret Henderson, experienced in domestic duties, cooking and childcare, and their 3 children, Elizabeth, age 14, capable of household assistance. William, age 10, bright and willing, and young Samuel, age 4. Dr. Hayes watched as potential buyers evaluated the family with calculating eyes. He recognized most of the faces in the crowd: farmers looking for additional hands, shopkeepers needing domestic help, and others whose motivations were less clear. The doctor had enough experience with human nature to know that not all of these potential buyers had the family's best interests at heart. A voice from the crowd called out, "What's the starting bid for the lot?" "We'll start at $15. For a 6-month contract," Clark replied. "The family will work together and housing will be provided by the purchaser. $15. Dr. Hayes did quick calculations in his head. It was more money than he had readily available, but not impossible to obtain. The question that haunted him was what he would do with a family of 4 if he somehow managed to win the auction. His clinic barely supported him alone, and he had no facilities to house additional people. The bidding began slowly. A local farmer offered $16, then another bidder raised it to $18. Dr. Hayes noticed how the family stood throughout the process, maintaining their dignity even as strangers determined their fate. Margaret Henderson's hand never left her youngest son's shoulder, while Robert kept his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the crowd, perhaps seeing a future that existed only in his hopes. As the bidding continued, Dr. Hayes found himself studying the potential buyers more closely. The farmer who had opened the bidding was known for working his laborers hard, but treating them fairly. However, another bidder, a man named Jeremiah Colt, who ran a lumber operation upstream, had a reputation for harsh treatment of those under his employ. The thought of the Henderson family, particularly the children, falling under Colt's control, made the doctor's stomach clench. $22. $25. The price climbed steadily, and Dr. Hayes realized with growing alarm that he was about to witness something he couldn't simply observe passively. His medical oath spoke of doing no harm, but surely there was also an obligation to prevent harm when possible. The question was whether he had the means to make a difference, and whether he possessed the courage to act, even if it meant risking his own precarious situation. The 10-year-old boy, William, caught the doctor's eye for a moment. In that brief exchange, Dr. Hayes saw something that made his decision for him. It wasn't just intelligence in the child's gaze, but a spark of curiosity about the world, a hunger for knowledge that reminded the doctor of himself at that age. This boy could be more than just a laborer for some indifferent employer. Given the right opportunities, the right guidance, he could become something remarkable. $30. The bidding had slowed, with only 3 serious contenders remaining. Dr. Hayes reached into his coat pocket and felt the modest collection of coins and bills that represented his current liquid assets. Not nearly enough for $30, but he had other resources. His medical equipment could be sold or traded. He owned a small collection of books that might have value to the right buyer. There were debts owed to him by patients who might be willing to settle if pressed. But even as he calculated possibilities, Dr. Hayes recognized the deeper question he faced. Was he prepared to fundamentally alter his life for a family of strangers? Could he take responsibility for 4 additional lives when he barely managed to sustain his own existence? The rational answer was no. But as he watched the Henderson family maintain their courage in the face of an uncertain future, rational considerations seemed suddenly less important than moral ones. $35. Jeremiah Colt's voice cut through the morning air, carrying with it an undertone of satisfaction that made Dr. Hayes's skin crawl. He knew Colt's operation had treated several of his workers for injuries that spoke of dangerous working conditions and indifferent oversight. The man viewed laborers as barely more than equipment, useful as long as they could work and discardable when they couldn't. $35 going once, Clark called out, his gavel raised expectantly. Dr. Hayes felt his heart racing as the moment of decision arrived. In the space of a few seconds, he weighed everything: his limited resources, his struggling practice, his own uncertain future in Riverside Settlement. Against all of that, he balanced the image of the Henderson family's quiet dignity, the intelligence in young William's eyes, and the knowledge that his inaction would condemn them to a fate that might destroy everything good that remained in them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. $40, Dr. Hayes called out, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet square. Every head turned in his direction, expressions ranging from surprise to curiosity to outright astonishment. Dr. Hayes himself felt a moment of disbelief at his own words, but as the Henderson family looked toward him with tentative hope, he knew there was no taking them back. Jeremiah Colt's face darkened with annoyance as he evaluated this unexpected competition. 45, he counted without hesitation. Dr. Hayes felt the weight of the moment pressing down upon him. $45 might as well have been $450, given his current financial situation. But as he looked at the Henderson family, as he saw the way Margaret Henderson's grip tightened protectively on her youngest son, as he witnessed the careful way Robert Henderson straightened his shoulders despite his injury, the doctor knew he had passed the point where retreat was possible. $50, he declared, his voice steadier than he felt. A murmur ran through the crowd. $50 was a substantial sum in Riverside Settlement, more than many families saw in several months. Clark looked around expectantly, waiting to see if anyone would match or exceed the doctor's bid. Even Jeremiah Colt seemed to hesitate, perhaps calculating whether the Henderson family was worth such an investment. The silence stretched out, pregnant with possibility and consequence. Dr. Hayes found himself holding his breath, simultaneously hoping his bid would stand and wondering what exactly he had committed himself to. The Henderson family remained motionless on the platform, but he could see the tension in their postures, the way they leaned almost imperceptibly toward him, as if drawn by the promise of salvation he represented. $50 going once, Clark announced, his voice echoing across the square. Dr. Hayes closed his eyes briefly, offering up a silent prayer to whatever forces might be listening that he would find a way to honor the commitment he was making. Going twice. The hammer fell with a sound that seemed to reverberate through the doctor's very soul. In that moment, Dr. Jonathan Hayes became responsible for 4 lives beyond his own, accepting an obligation that would test every aspect of his character and determination. As the Henderson family stepped down from the platform and walked slowly toward him, he realized that this morning had changed everything, setting in motion events that would transform not just his own life, but the entire fabric of Riverside Settlement itself. The walk from the auction platform to Dr. Hayes's clinic felt like the longest journey of his life. Behind him, the Henderson family followed in silence, their footsteps creating a rhythm that seemed to echo his racing heartbeat. $50. The sum reverberated through his mind with each step, a constant reminder of the magnitude of what he had just committed to. Margaret Henderson carried young Samuel, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder despite the morning's tumultuous events. The child's peaceful expression stood in stark contrast to the tension that radiated from the adults around him. Elizabeth walked beside her father, occasionally offering her arm when his injured leg caused him to stumble slightly on the uneven cobblestones. William, the 10-year-old who had caught the doctor's attention during the auction, maintained a careful distance from the group while his eyes catalogued every detail of their new surroundings. Dr. Hayes pushed open the door to his clinic, the familiar creak of its hinges now sounding ominous rather than welcoming. The space that had seemed barely adequate for one person suddenly felt impossibly cramped for 5. His examination table occupied the center of the main room, surrounded by glass cabinets containing his dwindling medical supplies. A small desk pushed against one wall held his patient records and correspondence, while a narrow staircase led to his living quarters above. "Please come in," he said, stepping aside to allow the family to enter. Robert Henderson limped through, the doorway first, his weathered hands gripping the frame for support. His eyes swept the room with the practiced assessment of a craftsman, taking note of loose floorboards, a window that didn't quite close properly, and shelving that had been installed by someone with more enthusiasm than skill. Margaret followed, still carrying Samuel, while Elizabeth and William filed in behind her. The family clustered together near the entrance, uncertain of their place in this new environment. Dr. Hayes realized with a start that they were waiting for instruction, for some indication of what was expected of them in their new circumstances. "I apologize for the cramped conditions," the doctor began, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "I hadn't anticipated. That is, I usually don't." He trailed off, realizing how inadequate his words sounded. How did one explain that? An impulsive act of conscience had fundamentally altered the lives of 5 people without a clear plan for what came next. Robert Henderson cleared his throat gently. "Dr. Hayes, we're grateful for what you've done, more grateful than we can express. We understand our situation, and we're prepared to work hard to earn our keep." The dignity in the man's voice struck Dr. Hayes powerfully. Despite losing everything, despite being reduced to the humiliation of an auction block, Robert Henderson maintained a sense of pride and responsibility that commanded respect. Margaret nodded in agreement with her husband's words, her free hand, finding Elizabeth's shoulder in a gesture of family solidarity. "Of course," Dr. Hayes replied, though he had no clear idea what work he could provide for 4 additional people. His medical practice generated barely enough income to sustain himself, and his living space above the clinic consisted of a single room with a bed, a small table, and little else. The practical realities of housing and feeding the Henderson family began to press upon him with increasing urgency. Young Samuel stirred in his mother's arms, blinking sleepy eyes as he took in his new surroundings. His gaze fixed on a collection of medical instruments displayed in a glass case, and he pointed with a chubby finger. "Mama, what are those shiny things?" "Medical tools, sweetheart," Margaret explained softly. "Dr. Hayes uses them to help people feel better when they're sick." William stepped closer to the case, his curiosity overcoming his natural caution. "How do they work?" he asked, directing the question toward Dr. Hayes. "Do they hurt people or help them?" The directness of the boy's inquiry caught the doctor off guard. Most children his age would have been overwhelmed by the morning's events, clinging to their parents and seeking comfort. Instead, William seemed energized by his new environment, eager to understand and learn despite their uncertain circumstances. "Both, in a way," Dr. Hayes answered honestly. "Sometimes helping someone requires causing temporary discomfort, like when I need to stitch a wound or set a broken bone, but the goal is always to heal." William nodded seriously, as if filing away. This information for future reference. Elizabeth watched her brother's interaction with the doctor, and Dr. Hayes caught a glimpse of protective concern in her expression. At 14, she had clearly assumed responsibilities beyond her years, serving as a bridge between her parents and younger siblings in ways that spoke of premature maturity. The sound of footsteps on the street outside drew everyone's attention to the window. Through the glass, they could see groups of people returning from the auction, their voices carrying fragments of conversation about the morning's events. Dr. Hayes caught enough words to understand that his unprecedented bid had become the primary topic of discussion throughout Riverside Settlement. $50 for the whole family, one voice said clearly. "Never seen the doc spend money like that before." "Wonder what he plans to do with them," another replied. "Barely keeps his own practice running." Margaret Henderson's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and Robert's jaw tightened with suppressed frustration. The reality of their situation was harsh enough without becoming the subject of public speculation and gossip. Dr. Hayes felt a surge of protective anger on their behalf, followed immediately by the sobering recognition that he had no clear answers to the questions being raised outside his window. "Perhaps we should discuss arrangements," he said, hoping to redirect everyone's attention away from the voices outside. "I have a small room upstairs, but it's hardly suitable for a family. We'll need to consider alternatives." Robert straightened as much as his injured leg would allow. "Dr. Hayes, I want you to understand something. We may have been purchased at auction, but we're not looking for charity. I'm a skilled carpenter, even with this bad leg. Margaret is an excellent cook and housekeeper. Elizabeth has experience caring for children and managing household tasks. Even William here is handy with repairs and has a good head for numbers." The pride in the man's voice was unmistakable, and Dr. Hayes found himself both humbled and inspired by the family's determination to maintain their dignity despite their circumstances. Here were people who had lost everything yet refused to surrender their sense of self-worth or their commitment to contributing meaningfully to their own survival. "I don't doubt your capabilities," Dr. Hayes replied carefully. "The challenge is finding ways to put your skills to use in a manner that benefits everyone. My practice provides steady work, but the income is modest." Elizabeth looked up at him with an expression that seemed far too mature for her 14 years. "What kind of risks, Dr. Hayes?" The girl's question cut straight to the heart of his dilemma. Financial risks, certainly. $50 represented a significant portion of his available resources. Professional risks as well, since taking on the responsibility for 4 additional people could potentially compromise his ability to serve his other patients effectively. But beyond those practical concerns lay deeper uncertainties about his own character and capabilities. Was he truly prepared to be responsible for the welfare of an entire family? Did he possess the wisdom and strength necessary to guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead? Before he could formulate an answer, a knock at the clinic door interrupted his thoughts. Through the glass, he could see the bulky silhouette of Sheriff Marcus Daniels, the settlement's law enforcement officer and unofficial keeper of public order. The sheriff's presence usually meant complications, and given the morning's unusual events, Dr. Hayes suspected this visit wouldn't be purely social. "I'll be right back," he told the Henderson family, then stepped outside to speak with Sheriff Daniels privately. "Afternoon, Doc," the sheriff said, his tone carefully neutral. "Heard about your activities at the auction this morning. Caused quite a stir around town." "I wasn't aware that participating in a legal auction was cause for official concern," Dr. Hayes replied, keeping his own voice level despite the defensiveness he felt rising within him. Sheriff Daniels chuckled, but there was little humor in the sound. "Nothing illegal about it, certainly, but $50 is a lot of money for a man in your position, and people are asking questions about where it came from and what you plan to do with your purchase." The word purchase struck Dr. Hayes like a physical blow. In his mind, he had rescued the Henderson family from an uncertain fate, but the legal reality was that he had indeed purchased their labor and services for a specified period. The distinction between salvation and ownership suddenly seemed uncomfortably thin. "My financial affairs are my own business, Sheriff," he said firmly. "As for what I plan to do, I intend to provide the Henderson family with fair treatment and honest work." "See that you do," Sheriff Daniels replied, his meaning unmistakable. "Because if there are complaints about their treatment, or if their presence here causes problems for the community, I'll be obligated to investigate. Understand?" Dr. Hayes nodded, recognizing the warning for what it was. In a small settlement like Riverside, public opinion carried significant weight, and the sheriff's primary concern was maintaining peace and order. If the doctor's impulsive act of conscience resulted in community discord, he could find himself facing official scrutiny that might threaten both his practice and his ability to protect the Henderson family. After the sheriff departed, Dr. Hayes remained outside for several minutes, gathering his thoughts and steeling himself for the challenges that lay ahead. Through the clinic window, he could see the Henderson family waiting patiently, their faces reflecting a mixture of hope and apprehension. They were depending on him now, trusting in his ability to provide not just shelter and sustenance, but guidance and protection in an uncertain world. When he returned inside, William was standing near his medical books, running his fingers along their spines with obvious longing. The boy looked up guiltily when the doctor entered, as if expecting to be scolded for his curiosity. "Do you enjoy reading, William?" Doctor? Hayes asked gently. The boy nodded eagerly. Yes, sir, I did when we had books, before. He trailed off, glancing toward his parents with obvious discomfort. Before the troubles started, Robert finished quietly. The boy's always been sharp with letters and numbers, had dreams of schooling, maybe even college someday. The wistfulness in his voice spoke of paternal aspirations that had been crushed by harsh circumstances. Dr. Hayes felt something shift inside him as he looked at the family gathered in his clinic. Perhaps this unexpected responsibility wasn't just an obligation he had assumed, but an opportunity he had been given. An opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of people who deserved better than the hand fate had dealt them. An opportunity to prove that compassion and courage could triumph over pragmatism and self-interest. Well then, he said, his voice carrying a confidence he was only beginning to feel, I suppose we should start planning how to make this arrangement work for everyone. The afternoon sun slanted through the clinic windows as Dr. Hayes began to outline the challenges and possibilities that lay before them all. 3 weeks had passed since the auction, and Dr. Hayes was beginning to understand that desperation often bred the most remarkable innovations. What had started as an impulsive act of conscience was slowly transforming into something none of them had anticipated, a partnership that challenged every assumption about their individual limitations and collective potential. The transformation began with Robert Henderson's restless energy. Despite his injured leg, the carpenter couldn't remain idle while surrounded by the clinic's obvious maintenance needs. On the 4th morning after their arrival, Dr. Hayes discovered him in the back room, carefully examining the warped floorboards that had plagued the building for years. These joists weren't properly supported when they were installed, Robert explained, running his weathered hands along the wood grain. Give me some basic materials and a week's time, and I can make this floor solid enough to perform surgery. Dr. Hayes had initially protested, concerned about the man's injured leg and their precarious financial situation. But Robert's expertise became undeniable as he pointed out structural problems that had been causing ongoing issues with the building's stability. More importantly, his assessment revealed that many of the repairs could be accomplished using salvaged materials and ingenious workarounds that required skill rather than expensive supplies. Margaret Henderson proved equally resourceful in her domain. The doctor's previous attempts at maintaining a household had been haphazard at best, consisting mainly of cold meals eaten standing up and laundry that accumulated until it became unavoidable. Within days of the family's arrival, the clinic had acquired an organizational efficiency that amazed him. Doctor, when did you last have a proper inventory of your medical supplies? Margaret asked one afternoon, holding a tablet where she had been methodically cataloguing the contents of his medicine cabinets. I'm not entirely certain, he admitted, embarrassed by the admission. I generally just order what seems to be running low. Margaret's gentle smile didn't quite hide her dismay at his lack of systematic record-keeping. With your permission, I'd like to establish a proper inventory system. Elizabeth has beautiful handwriting, and she's excellent with organization. We could track usage patterns, anticipate needs before supplies run critically low, and identify opportunities for bulk purchasing that might reduce costs. The suggestion was so practical, so obviously beneficial, that Dr. Hayes wondered why he had never implemented such a system himself. The answer, he realized, lay in the isolation that had gradually consumed his professional life. Working alone, struggling to manage every aspect of his practice without assistance, he had lost sight of efficiencies that were immediately obvious to fresh eyes. Elizabeth Henderson embraced the inventory project with an enthusiasm that revealed capabilities far beyond her 14 years. Her neat, precise handwriting transformed chaotic supply cabinets into models of organization, while her methodical approach to record-keeping established systems that would have impressed trained clerks in the largest city hospitals. "Dr. Hayes," she said one evening, presenting him with a comprehensive report, "I've calculated that you're paying nearly 30% more than necessary for several common medications because you're purchasing small quantities from different suppliers. If we consolidated orders and bought larger amounts less frequently, the savings would be substantial." The girl's analysis was thorough and accurate, demonstrating not just organizational skills, but genuine business acumen. Dr. Hayes found himself wondering what Elizabeth might accomplish if given access to proper education and opportunities. In the larger cities, young women with her abilities were beginning to find positions in hospitals and medical offices, contributing to the profession in ways that went far beyond traditional domestic roles. But it was William who provided the most surprising revelations. The 10-year-old's fascination with medical books had not diminished with familiarity. Instead, his appetite for learning seemed to grow with every page he absorbed. Dr. Hayes began finding him in the early morning hours before the clinic opened, carefully reading through medical texts with the focused attention of a devoted scholar. "William, you understand that these books contain very advanced concepts," the doctor said one morning, concerned that the boy might be frustrated by material beyond his comprehension. "Yes, sir," William replied, not looking up from a treatise on anatomy. "I don't understand everything, but I understand more each time I read them. And when I watch you examine patients, I can see how the book's knowledge applies to real situations." Dr. Hayes sat down beside the boy, curious about his thought process. "What connections have you noticed?" William's eyes brightened with enthusiasm. "Well, yesterday, when Mrs. Patterson came in complaining about stomach pain, you asked her specific questions about where exactly it hurt and when the pain was worst. Then you pressed different parts of her abdomen and watched her reactions. The anatomy book explains why different locations of pain might indicate different problems with internal organs." The observation was remarkably sophisticated for a child his age. More importantly, it demonstrated that William wasn't just memorizing information, but actively integrating theoretical knowledge with practical applications. Dr. Hayes felt a familiar excitement that he hadn't experienced since his own medical training, the thrill of watching a keen mind make genuine discoveries. "Would you like to observe more patient examinations?" the doctor asked. "With their permission, of course, and only for educational purposes." William nodded so eagerly that Dr. Hayes couldn't help but smile. The boy's hunger for learning was infectious, reminding the doctor of his own passion for medicine and inspiring him to see his work through fresh, curious eyes. The arrangement that had begun as an act of desperate charity was evolving into something far more complex and valuable. The Henderson family wasn't just earning their keep through manual labor and domestic assistance. They were actively improving every aspect of the clinic's operations while discovering their own hidden potential in the process. The transformation hadn't gone unnoticed by the broader community. Patients began commenting on the clinic's improved organization and efficiency. Mrs. Patterson, who had been skeptical of the unusual arrangement, grudgingly admitted that the medicine for her stomach ailment had been prepared more quickly and accurately than ever before. "That young lady has quite a head for details," she told Dr. Hayes after Elizabeth had efficiently processed her prescription. "Reminds me of my sister's daughter who works at the bank in Springfield. Sharp as a tack, that one." Even more significantly, the clinic began attracting new patients. Families who had previously traveled to distant towns for medical care started seeking treatment locally, drawn by reports of improved service and the welcoming atmosphere that Margaret Henderson's presence had created. Children who had been afraid of medical examinations responded positively to Elizabeth's gentle assistance and William's curious questions about their symptoms. The increased patient volume created new challenges, but also new opportunities. Dr. Hayes found himself busier than he had been in years, yet paradoxically less stressed than before. The Henderson family's assistance allowed him to focus on medical diagnosis and treatment while trusting them to handle administrative tasks, supply management, and patient comfort with competence that exceeded his own abilities in those areas. 1. Particularly busy afternoon when a farmer's accident had brought multiple injured workers to the clinic simultaneously, the effectiveness of their collaboration became undeniable. While Dr. Hayes treated the most seriously injured patient, Margaret efficiently triaged the others. Elizabeth prepared supplies and bandages with practiced precision, and even young William helped by keeping anxious family members calm with his earnest explanations of the treatment process. "Never seen anything like it," muttered Jake Morrison, who had brought the injured workers to town. "This place runs smoother than most big city hospitals I've visited." The comment stayed with Dr. Hayes long after the patients had been treated and released. He was beginning to realize that what they had created together transcended the simple labor arrangement originally envisioned. The Henderson family wasn't just working for him. They were working with him, contributing unique skills and perspectives that enhanced everyone's capabilities. But perhaps the most remarkable change was occurring in the family dynamics themselves. Robert Henderson's sense of purpose had returned, as his carpentry skills proved essential to the clinic's physical improvements. His injured leg still limited his mobility, but his expertise and experience were generating tangible value that restored his confidence and dignity. Margaret's organizational abilities had found an ideal outlet in managing the clinic's domestic operations. Her natural warmth and competence with patients created an atmosphere of caring that complemented Dr. Hayes's medical expertise perfectly. She was discovering that her skills extended far beyond traditional household management to include aspects of patient care and business administration. Elizabeth was blossoming under the responsibility of her administrative duties. Her natural intelligence and attention to detail were finding expression in ways that would have been impossible in their previous circumstances. Dr. Hayes had begun discussing the possibility of corresponding with colleagues in larger cities about opportunities for young women in medical offices, recognizing that Elizabeth's talents deserved broader horizons than Riverside Settlement could provide. Most dramatically, William's intellectual gifts were receiving the nurturing they had always needed. His exposure to medical knowledge and practice was awakening ambitions that reached far beyond the limitations of their rural environment. Dr. Hayes found himself contemplating possibilities that seemed almost fantastical. Could this carpenter's son, given proper education and opportunity, actually pursue a career in medicine? The financial aspects of their arrangement were also evolving in unexpected directions. The clinic's increased efficiency and patient volume were generating improved revenues, while the family's cost-saving measures and practical innovations were reducing expenses. What had initially seemed like an unsustainable financial burden was transforming into a mutually beneficial partnership that strengthened everyone's economic position. One evening, as they gathered around the dinner table that Margaret had somehow carved out of the clinic's limited space, Dr. Hayes looked at the Henderson family and realized that his impulsive auction bid had accomplished something he had never anticipated. He hadn't just saved 4 people from an uncertain fate. He had discovered 4 individuals whose unique talents and perspectives were helping him become a better physician and a more complete human being. "I want to discuss something with all of you," he began, setting down his fork and meeting each person's gaze in turn. When I bid for your family at that auction, I thought I was providing assistance to people in need. I'm beginning to understand that I was actually receiving a gift that I hadn't known I needed. Robert and Margaret exchanged glances, while Elizabeth and William listened with the focused attention they brought to all serious conversations. What I'm proposing, Dr. Hayes continued, is that we formalize our partnership in a way that recognizes everyone's contributions and establishes a foundation for our shared future. Not as employer and employees, but as partners working toward common goals. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. Outside, the sounds of Riverside Settlement continued their familiar rhythm, but inside the clinic, 5 people contemplated a future that none of them had imagined just weeks before. The desperate circumstances that had brought them together were giving way to something far more valuable, a recognition that their combined efforts could accomplish things that none of them could achieve alone. The foundation for something extraordinary had been laid, though none of them yet understood the full implications of what they were building together. The first sign of trouble came disguised as a compliment. Mrs. Abernathy, the settlement's most prolific gossip, entered the clinic on a Tuesday morning wearing the kind of smile that experienced residents of Riverside had learned to distrust. "My goodness, Doctor," she exclaimed, her voice pitched loud enough to carry beyond the clinic walls. "This place has certainly changed since you acquired your helpers. Everything is so organized and efficient now. Must be quite profitable having all that free labor." Dr. Hayes felt his jaw tighten at the woman's choice of words, but before he could respond, Elizabeth stepped forward from behind the supply cabinet where she had been cataloging inventory. Her smile was polite, but her eyes held a steel that belied her 14 years. "Mrs. Abernathy, how lovely to see you again. Are you here for your monthly consultation about your rheumatism, or did you need something else today?" The girl's perfectly mannered response somehow managed to be both respectful and pointed, reminding Mrs. Abernathy that her own medical concerns were well known, while subtly deflecting attention from the implied criticism. The older woman's smile faltered slightly as she realized her probe had been parried by someone she had underestimated, but Mrs. Abernathy's visit was merely the opening salvo in what would prove to be a sustained campaign of scrutiny and suspicion. Over the following days, Dr. Hayes noticed increased attention from community members who had previously shown little interest in his affairs. Neighbors lingered outside the clinic, observing the comings and goings with obvious curiosity. Conversations stopped abruptly when he approached groups gathered in the town square. The weight of collective judgment pressed down upon them all like an approaching storm. The source of much of this hostility became clear when Jeremiah Colt began making his presence felt throughout the settlement. The lumber operation owner had not forgotten his unsuccessful bid at the auction, and his resentment had been festering for weeks. Where Dr. Hayes had seen an opportunity to help a family in need, Colt saw a deliberate attempt to undermine his authority and influence in the community. "It's not natural," Colt declared loudly at the general store, ensuring his words would reach the maximum number of ears. "A man paying $50 for laborers he don't need, setting them up like they're family instead of workers. Makes honest employers look bad when they expect proper discipline and respect from their hands." His complaints found receptive audiences among those who felt threatened by the clinic's growing success. Other business owners began to worry that the Henderson family's obvious prosperity under Dr. Hayes's arrangement might give their own workers unrealistic expectations about treatment and compensation. If word spread that laborers could be treated as partners rather than mere employees, it might upset the established social order that kept wages low and workers compliant. The criticism intensified when Margaret Henderson was seen shopping at the general store, purchasing supplies with money that clearly came from her own earnings rather than charitable allowance. Her dignified manner and quality of dress rankled those who believed that auction purchases should remain in positions of obvious subservience. "Acting above her station," muttered Cornelius Webb, the settlement's banker, as he watched Margaret carefully select fabric for new clothes, giving these people ideas that they're equal to their betters. No good can come of such arrangements. Webb's concerns were more than philosophical. The clinic's improved financial position had enabled Dr. Hayes to pay down debts that had been accumulating for months, reducing the banker's leverage over the physician's affairs. Moreover, the doctor had begun discussing plans for expanding his practice, potentially requiring loans that would need to be negotiated from a position of strength rather than desperation. The tension reached a critical point when young William's educational progress became publicly visible. Dr. Hayes had begun allowing the boy to assist with simple medical procedures, teaching him to prepare instruments and observe patient examinations. William's obvious intelligence and genuine enthusiasm for learning created reactions that ranged from admiration to outright hostility. "That boy's getting ideas above his place," complained Thomas Fletcher, whose own sons showed little interest in education beyond basic literacy. "Carpenters' children should learn carpentry, not go putting on airs about medicine and such fancy learning." The criticism stung because it touched on deeper anxieties about social mobility and class boundaries. In a community where most people expected their children to follow the same occupations as their parents, William's obvious intellectual gifts and growing medical knowledge represented a challenge to accepted notions of social hierarchy. The situation escalated dramatically when Dr. Benjamin Crawford arrived in Riverside Settlement. Crawford was a physician from the state capital who traveled to rural communities providing consultations and collecting information about medical practices in remote areas. His visit was initially welcomed as an opportunity to demonstrate the clinic's improvements and perhaps gain recognition for their innovative approaches to patient care. Crawford's inspection began cordially enough. He praised the clinic's organization and efficiency, complimented Elizabeth's administrative skills, and expressed interest in Dr. Hayes's collaborative approach to medical practice. But his demeanor changed noticeably when he observed William. "Assisting with a patient examination, Dr. Hayes," Crawford said privately after the patient had left, "I'm concerned about what I've witnessed here. That boy has no medical training, no formal education, yet you're allowing him to participate in procedures that should be restricted to qualified professionals." William's assistance is limited to observation and basic preparation tasks, Dr. Hayes replied carefully. His presence helps patients feel more comfortable, and his questions often provide valuable insights. Crawford's expression remained skeptical. The practice of medicine requires proper credentials and training. Allowing untrained individuals, regardless of their apparent intelligence, to participate in medical procedures sets a dangerous precedent. What happens if word spreads that you're training carpenters' children to practice medicine? The professional standards we've worked so hard to establish could be undermined. The visiting physician's concerns reflected broader tensions within the medical profession itself. As medical knowledge became more sophisticated and specialized, there was increasing emphasis on formal education and professional boundaries. The idea that a working-class child might possess the intellectual capacity for medical training challenged assumptions about who was qualified to enter the profession. But Crawford's most damaging observation came when he witnessed the partnership dynamic between Dr. Hayes and the Henderson family during a busy afternoon at the clinic. The seamless coordination between all 5 individuals, the obvious mutual respect, and the shared decision-making authority troubled him deeply. "Dr. Hayes," he said, after watching Margaret efficiently triage patients while Elizabeth managed supplies and Robert consulted on building improvements. "This arrangement appears to have blurred appropriate boundaries between professional and personal relationships. These people are your employees, yet they seem to be functioning as equals in medical decisions. They contribute valuable expertise in their respective areas," Dr. Hayes responded, feeling defensive but trying to maintain professional courtesy. "Their insights and assistance have improved patient care and operational efficiency significantly. But at what cost to professional authority and medical standards?" Crawford pressed. "Medicine requires clear hierarchies and established protocols. When patients see workers making decisions that should be reserved for trained physicians, it undermines confidence in professional medical practice." Crawford's visit concluded with a formal report that would be submitted to state medical authorities. While he acknowledged the clinic's improvements in efficiency and patient satisfaction, he also documented concerns about professional boundaries, training standards, and the appropriateness of involving untrained individuals in medical procedures. The report's implications became clear within days when Sheriff Daniels received inquiries from state officials about the clinic's operations. The sheriff, already concerned about community tensions surrounding the Henderson family's situation, found himself caught between defending a local physician and addressing legitimate questions about medical standards and professional conduct. "Doc, I'm going to be straight with you," Sheriff Daniels said during a tense meeting in the clinic. "There are people asking questions about what goes on here, and some of those people have authority to make trouble for your practice. You need to consider whether your current arrangements are worth the risks they're creating." The pressure intensified when Jeremiah Colt organized a formal petition demanding investigation of the clinic's operations. His arguments focused on unfair competition, inappropriate labor relationships, and concerns about medical standards, but the underlying motivation was clearly personal resentment and fear of social change. Riverside Settlement has always been a community where people know their place and respect established order, Colt declared at a town meeting called to discuss the petition. "When outsiders come in with fancy ideas about how things should be done, it disrupts the harmony that has kept our community stable and prosperous." The irony of Colt's appeal to harmony was lost on no one who remembered his harsh treatment of workers and his attempts to monopolize local timber resources. But his words resonated with those who felt threatened by change and uncertain about their own positions in an evolving social structure. Dr. Hayes found himself facing the most serious crisis of his professional career. The success that had seemed like vindication of his moral convictions was now being portrayed as evidence of dangerous radicalism and professional misconduct. The Henderson family, who had transformed his practice and enriched his life immeasurably, were being characterized as threats to community stability and medical standards. The situation reached a breaking point when anonymous complaints were filed with state medical authorities alleging that Dr. Hayes was practicing medicine without proper oversight, employing unqualified individuals in medical procedures, and operating outside accepted professional standards. The complaints triggered a formal investigation that could result in suspension of his medical license and closure of the clinic. As word of the investigation spread throughout Riverside Settlement, the community found itself divided into opposing camps. Supporters of Dr. Hayes and the Henderson family pointed to improved patient care, increased access to medical services, and the obvious benefits of their collaborative approach. Critics, led by Colt and supported by those threatened by social change, argued for strict adherence to traditional hierarchies and professional boundaries. The Henderson family faced their own crisis of confidence as the attacks intensified. Despite their obvious contributions and growing sense of belonging in Riverside Settlement, they remained vulnerable to accusations that they had overstepped appropriate boundaries and assumed positions beyond their social station. "Maybe we should leave," Margaret said quietly one evening as they discussed the mounting pressure. "We never intended to cause problems for Dr. Hayes or create divisions in the community." "Running away won't solve anything," Robert replied firmly, though his own concern was evident in his voice. "We've done nothing wrong, and the work we're doing here matters too much to abandon because some people are afraid of change." Elizabeth and William listened to their parents' conversation with the intensity of young people whose futures hung in the balance. They had discovered talents and possibilities they had never imagined, but those discoveries now seemed threatened by forces beyond their control. Dr. Hayes faced the most difficult decision of his professional life. He could attempt to preserve his medical practice by distancing himself from the Henderson family and returning to conventional professional relationships, or he could defend what they had built together, knowing that doing so might cost him everything he had worked to achieve. The investigation would force everyone involved to confront fundamental questions about social justice, professional standards, and the courage required to defend principles in the face of overwhelming opposition. The storm that had been building since the auction was about to break with full fury, testing whether their unprecedented partnership could survive the forces arrayed against it. The scarlet fever outbreak began quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a whisper that gradually becomes a scream. 7-year-old Annie Patterson was the first to fall ill, though her initial symptoms seemed no different from the common ailments that regularly brought children to Dr. Hayes's clinic. A mild fever, complaints of a sore throat, the kind of restless irritability that parents in Riverside Settlement had learned to recognize as the prelude to childhood illness. Margaret Henderson was the first to notice the pattern. Her years of caring for her own children had given her an intuitive understanding of how sickness moved through communities, and by the 3rd day of Annie's illness, she had identified subtle signs that suggested something more serious than a routine infection. "Doctor," she said quietly, drawing Dr. Hayes aside after Annie's mother had left with instructions for continued care. "I'm concerned about the rash developing on that child's torso. Combined with the high fever and throat inflammation, it reminds me of cases I witnessed during an outbreak in our previous town." Dr. Hayes had been thinking along similar lines, but Margaret's confirmation crystallized his growing fears. Scarlet fever was a devastating illness that could sweep through a community like wildfire, claiming lives and leaving survivors with permanent complications. More immediately relevant to their current situation, managing an outbreak would require exactly the kind of collaborative approach that state medical authorities were questioning. The diagnosis was confirmed when 2 more children presented with identical symptoms the following day. By the end of the week, 8 families in Riverside Settlement were dealing with sick children, and panic was beginning to spread faster than the disease itself. Dr. Benjamin Crawford, who had remained in town to complete his investigation of the clinic's operations, found himself confronting a medical emergency that would test every assumption he had made about professional standards and appropriate medical practice. The theoretical concerns about training and credentials that had dominated his report suddenly seemed less important than the practical challenge of preventing a community-wide disaster. "Dr. Hayes," Crawford said grimly after examining the latest. "Patients, we're looking at a full-scale scarlet fever outbreak. Based on the progression I've observed, we can expect the number of cases to double or triple within the next week. Do you have sufficient resources to manage that kind of patient?" Load. The question hung heavily in the air between them. Dr. Hayes knew that managing an outbreak of this magnitude would require every resource at his disposal, including the specialized skills and knowledge that the Henderson family had developed over their months of collaboration. But acknowledging that reality in front of Crawford meant admitting that his medical practice depended on individuals whose qualifications the visiting physician had specifically questioned. "We'll manage," Dr. Hayes replied carefully, "using all available resources and personnel." Crawford's expression remained skeptical, but before he could voice further objections, a commotion outside the clinic demanded immediate attention. Jake Morrison, the farmer whose workers Dr. Hayes had treated weeks earlier, was carrying his 6-year-old daughter in his arms. The child's body was burning with fever, and her distinctive rash left no doubt about her diagnosis. "Please, Doc," Morrison pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "She got sick so fast. This morning she was playing, and now she can barely keep her eyes open." What happened next would become a defining moment in the relationship between Dr. Hayes, the Henderson family, and the broader Riverside settlement community. As Dr. Hayes began his examination of Morrison's daughter, the clinic transformed into a precisely coordinated medical facility that demonstrated the true value of their collaborative approach. Elizabeth immediately began preparing the medications and supplies needed for scarlet fever treatment, her months of inventory management having given her intimate knowledge of where everything was located and how quickly it could be accessed. Margaret stepped forward to comfort Morrison while simultaneously gathering information about the child's symptoms and their progression. Robert, despite his injured leg, began rearranging furniture to create optimal conditions for examination and treatment. Most remarkably, William positioned himself where he could observe the procedure while staying out of the way, his questions and observations providing insights that proved genuinely valuable to the diagnostic process. "Dr. Hayes," William said quietly, "when Annie Patterson was here yesterday, she mentioned that her throat felt like it had sandpaper in it. This little girl is making the same kind of swallowing motions Annie was making. Does that tell us anything about how far the infection has progressed?" The boy's observation was astute and medically relevant, demonstrating exactly the kind of pattern recognition that experienced physicians relied upon for diagnosis and treatment decisions. Dr. Crawford, who had been preparing to criticize the involvement of untrained personnel, found himself instead witnessing a level of coordinated patient care that exceeded what he had seen in many established medical facilities. As Morrison's daughter received treatment and began showing signs of improvement, other families arrived with sick children. The clinic filled with worried parents and feverish youngsters, creating exactly the kind of crisis situation that tested medical facilities to their limits. Dr. Hayes made a decision that would have profound implications for everyone involved. Rather than attempting to handle the outbreak alone, or asking Crawford to assist while excluding the Henderson family, he chose to operate the clinic at full capacity, utilizing every skill and resource available to combat the spreading disease. "Elizabeth," he said clearly, ensuring Crawford could hear every word, "I need you to prepare treatment protocols for all current patients and establish a system for tracking symptoms and medication schedules. Margaret, please organize triage procedures so we can prioritize the most serious cases. Robert, we'll need isolation areas set up to prevent further transmission. William, I want you to help monitor patients and alert us to any changes in condition." The directness of his instructions left no doubt about the roles each family member would play in managing the crisis. If Crawford intended to criticize their involvement in medical procedures, he would have to do so while watching them save children's lives. The outbreak's progression over the following days created a natural experiment in medical collaboration that no theoretical discussion could replicate. As more families sought treatment, the clinic's capacity was pushed beyond anything Dr. Hayes could have managed alone. The Henderson family's contributions became not just helpful, but essential to providing adequate care for the growing number of patients, Margaret's experience with childhood illnesses proved invaluable in recognizing symptoms and complications that might have been missed by someone less familiar with pediatric care. Her ability to communicate with frightened parents and anxious children created an atmosphere of calm competence that enhanced the effectiveness of medical treatment. Elizabeth's administrative skills ensured that medications were properly tracked. Appointments were efficiently scheduled, and patient records were maintained with precision that would have impressed hospital administrators in major cities. Her organizational abilities prevented the kinds of errors and oversights that could prove fatal during a medical emergency. Robert's practical expertise enabled rapid modifications to the clinic's physical space, creating isolation areas, improving ventilation, and establishing workflow patterns that minimize the risk of cross-contamination. His carpentry skills, initially questioned as irrelevant to medical practice, proved essential to creating a safe and efficient treatment environment. Most significantly, William's growing medical knowledge and natural observational abilities made him an invaluable assistant in patient monitoring and assessment. His youth allowed him to communicate effectively with child patients who might be intimidated by adult medical personnel, while his genuine curiosity about their symptoms often revealed important diagnostic information. Dr. Crawford found himself in the unprecedented position of witnessing medical practice that challenged every assumption underlying his professional concerns. The theoretical questions about training and credentials seemed increasingly irrelevant when measured against the practical reality of effective patient care and positive treatment outcomes. The crisis deepened when Jeremiah Colt's own grandson fell seriously ill with scarlet fever. Colt, who had been leading the campaign against Dr. Hayes and the Henderson family, suddenly faced the prospect of his family's welfare depending on the very medical practice he had been trying to undermine. The moment when Colt carried his grandson into the clinic represented a turning point that transcended personal animosity and political maneuvering. Faced with a child's life hanging in the balance, the lumber operation owner found himself forced to acknowledge that his concerns about social hierarchies and professional boundaries mattered less than accessing the best available medical care. "Dr. Hayes," Colt said quietly, his earlier bombast replaced by genuine fear. "Please help him. He's all the family I have left." The response that followed demonstrated the true character of everyone involved in the clinic's operations. Despite Colt's attempts to destroy their partnership and undermine their work, Dr. Hayes and the Henderson family treated his grandson with the same careful attention and professional competence they provided to every patient. William, showing wisdom beyond his years, spent extra time with Colt's grandson, using his natural rapport with children to keep the boy calm during treatment. Elizabeth ensured that the child received priority attention for medication and monitoring. Margaret provided comfort and support to Colt himself, recognizing that his gruff exterior concealed genuine terror about losing someone he loved. The treatment proved successful, and Colt's grandson began recovering within days. But the experience had a profound impact on the man who had been the clinic's most vocal critic. Watching his family member receive excellent care from people he had been trying to destroy forced him to confront the fundamental injustice of his position. As the outbreak began to subside after 2 weeks of intensive treatment, the results spoke for themselves. Not a single child in Riverside Settlement had died from scarlet fever, and complications had been minimal compared to historical patterns for the disease. The clinic's collaborative approach had provided a level of medical care that exceeded what most rural communities could expect during such emergencies. Dr. Crawford, who had arrived in Riverside Settlement, prepared to document professional misconduct and inappropriate medical practices, found himself instead compiling a report that challenged his own assumptions about medical training and professional standards. The evidence before him was undeniable. The Henderson family's involvement had improved rather than compromised patient care. "Dr. Hayes," Crawford said during a private conversation as he prepared to leave town, "I came here with serious concerns about your methods and the appropriateness of involving untrained individuals in medical procedures. What I've witnessed during this outbreak has forced me to reconsider some fundamental assumptions about medical practice and professional training." He paused, clearly struggling with concepts that challenged his established worldview. That young man, William, demonstrates capabilities that many formally trained medical students don't possess. His observations and insights have been genuinely valuable, and his rapport with patients has enhanced treatment effectiveness measurably. Crawford's acknowledgement represented more than personal growth. It reflected a broader recognition that medical competence couldn't be measured solely by formal credentials and institutional training. The crisis had revealed that practical experience, natural aptitude, and collaborative teamwork could produce results that traditional approaches might not achieve. The outbreak's resolution also created an opportunity for community healing that extended far beyond medical treatment. Families who had been suspicious of the Henderson family's unconventional position in the community found themselves personally indebted to people they had previously viewed with skepticism or hostility. Mrs. Abernathy, whose gossip had helped fuel community tensions, approached Margaret Henderson with uncharacteristic humility after her own granddaughter recovered from scarlet fever. "Mrs. Henderson," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. My granddaughter told me how kind you were to her during her illness, how you stayed with her when she was frightened and helped her feel safe. I've said things about your family that were wrong, and I'm ashamed of my behavior." Similar conversations took place throughout Riverside Settlement as community members recognized that their prejudices and fears had blinded them to the genuine value of what Dr. Hayes and the Henderson family had built together. The crisis had stripped away superficial concerns about social hierarchies and professional boundaries, revealing the fundamental importance of competence, compassion, and collaboration in serving community needs. The investigation by state medical authorities took on an entirely different character in light of the outbreak and its successful management. Instead of documenting professional misconduct, investigators found themselves examining a model of rural medical practice that achieved results exceeding those of many conventional facilities. Jeremiah Colt, whose grandson's life had been saved by the people he had tried to destroy, made a public statement that shocked everyone familiar with his previous positions. "I was wrong," he announced at a town meeting called to discuss the clinic's future. "I let fear and pride cloud my judgment about what was best for our community. Dr. Hayes and the Henderson family have proven their worth beyond any doubt, and I will oppose any effort to interfere with their work." The transformation in community attitudes created space for broader discussions about social mobility, educational opportunity, and the value of recognizing talent regardless of its origins. William's obvious medical aptitude had captured the attention of visitors from the state capitol, leading to conversations about scholarship opportunities and advanced training that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. But perhaps the most significant outcome of the crisis was the recognition that the partnership between Dr. Hayes and the Henderson family represented something genuinely innovative and valuable. Their collaborative approach had created a medical practice that served community needs more effectively than traditional models, while providing opportunities for personal growth and development that benefited everyone involved. The scarlet fever outbreak had tested their partnership under the most demanding circumstances possible, and they had not only survived, but thrived. The crisis that had threatened to destroy everything they had built together had instead proven the fundamental strength and value of their unprecedented collaboration. As Riverside Settlement began returning to normal routines, everyone involved understood that they had participated in something transformative. The desperate circumstances that had brought them together at an auction had evolved into a partnership that challenged conventional assumptions and demonstrated new possibilities for medical practice, community service, and social progress. The sad revelation that emerged from the crisis was simple but profound. When people were allowed to contribute their unique talents and perspectives without regard for artificial barriers of class or convention, remarkable things became possible. The test had been passed, but greater challenges and opportunities lay ahead. The letter arrived on a crisp October morning, bearing the official seal of the State Medical Board and carrying implications that would reshape not only the Henderson family's future, but the entire trajectory of medical practice in rural communities. Dr. Hayes held the envelope with trembling hands, acutely aware that its contents could either validate everything they had built together or signal the beginning of its systematic dismantling. Margaret Henderson noticed his hesitation as she prepared breakfast in the clinic's expanded kitchen area. Over the months since the scarlet fever outbreak, the physical space had evolved to accommodate their growing needs, with Robert's carpentry skills creating a functional living area that maintained professional boundaries while acknowledging their status as partners rather than employer and employees. "Whatever that letter contains," Margaret said gently, setting down her coffee cup, "we'll face it together. We've proven our worth to this community and to ourselves. No bureaucratic decision can diminish what we've accomplished." Elizabeth looked up from the medical journal she had been studying, her literacy having advanced to the point where she could comprehend complex medical terminology and contribute meaningfully to discussions about treatment protocols. At 15, she possessed administrative capabilities that exceeded those of trained clerks in major metropolitan hospitals, and her organizational innovations had been documented by visiting officials as models worthy of broader implementation. William, now 11, and demonstrating medical knowledge that astonished experienced physicians, paused in his morning review of anatomical diagrams. His ability to correlate theoretical knowledge with practical applications had evolved to the point where Dr. Hayes regularly consulted him about diagnostic possibilities and treatment strategies. The boy's questions often revealed insights that advanced the understanding of cases that might otherwise have proven challenging. Robert, whose leg had healed sufficiently to allow him greater mobility, was already at work on the clinic's latest expansion project. The success of their medical practice had generated sufficient revenue to fund improvements that would serve the broader regional community. His architectural plans included specialized treatment rooms, expanded storage for medical supplies, and living quarters that could accommodate visiting medical professionals who came to study their collaborative approach. Dr. Hayes broke the seal and unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the formal language that would determine their collective fate. As he read, his expression shifted from apprehension to amazement, and finally to something approaching disbelief. "They're not shutting us down," he announced, his voice barely above a whisper. They're asking us to serve as a model for rural medical practice. The State Medical Board wants to establish a formal program based on our collaborative approach, and they're offering William a full scholarship to medical college." The silence that followed was pregnant with possibilities none of them had dared to imagine. The investigation that had threatened to destroy their partnership had instead resulted in official recognition and support for their innovative methods. More significantly, William's obvious talents were being acknowledged at the highest levels of medical authority, opening doors that would have been inconceivable for a carpenter's son just months earlier. But the letter contained additional surprises that would challenge them in unexpected ways. The State Medical Board was proposing to fund a formal training program that would bring young people from across the region to Riverside Settlement to learn the collaborative approach that the Henderson family and Dr. Hayes had pioneered. Elizabeth would be offered a position as head administrator of the program, with responsibilities that included curriculum development and student supervision. Margaret's contributions to patient care and community health had also been recognized, with an offer to develop training materials for rural medical assistance that could be distributed throughout the state. Her practical experience and natural teaching abilities were seen as resources that could benefit countless communities struggling with limited medical access. Even Robert's architectural innovations had attracted attention, with requests to design medical facilities that incorporated the workflow improvements and spatial organizations he had developed for their clinic. The integration of practical construction knowledge with medical operational requirements had created efficiencies that traditional medical facility designers had overlooked. The recognition brought new challenges that tested their partnership in ways the original crisis had not. Success attracted attention from medical professionals, government officials, and educational institutions who wanted to study their methods, recruit their talents, or replicate their achievements in other locations. Dr. Benjamin Crawford, whose initial skepticism had transformed into enthusiastic advocacy, returned to Riverside Settlement as the representative of a consortium of medical colleges interested in establishing a formal partnership with their practice. His proposal involved creating a teaching hospital that would serve as a training ground for a new generation of medical professionals educated in collaborative approaches to patient care. "What you've created here," Crawford explained during a meeting that included the entire Henderson family, represents a fundamental advancement in medical practice. The integration of diverse skills and perspectives has produced outcomes that exceed what traditional approaches achieve. We want to help you expand these innovations while preserving the essential elements that make them effective. The proposal was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Expansion would provide resources and opportunities that could benefit countless communities and individuals, but it also risked transforming their intimate partnership into something more institutional and impersonal. The question they faced was whether their collaborative approach could survive the attention and growth that success had generated. William's scholarship opportunity created the most complex emotional challenges. His acceptance to medical college represented the fulfillment of dreams that had seemed impossible when his family stood on the auction block. But leaving Riverside Settlement would separate him from the medical practice where he had discovered his calling and the family partnership that had nurtured his development. "I don't want to leave," William confided to Dr. Hayes during one of their evening discussions about medical cases. "Everything I've learned about medicine, everything I want to become, started here with all of you. How can I abandon that to study with people who might not understand what we've built together?" Dr. Hayes understood the boy's conflicted feelings because he shared them. William's presence had enriched his own understanding of medicine and reminded him of the joy and curiosity that had originally drawn him to the profession. The prospect of continuing their work without William's insights and enthusiasm seemed to diminish the entire enterprise. But Margaret Henderson provided the wisdom that resolved their collective uncertainty. Her perspective as a mother who had watched her children grow beyond the limitations that circumstances had once imposed carried weight that transcended personal preferences and emotional attachments. "William's education isn't about leaving us behind," she said during a family meeting that would determine their response to the various opportunities. "It's about expanding what we've started here to reach places and people we could never serve ourselves. He'll carry our values and methods to institutions that can multiply their impact far beyond what we could accomplish alone." Her words resonated with everyone involved because they reflected the fundamental principle that had guided their partnership from the beginning: the belief that individual talents should be developed and applied in ways that benefit the broader community. William's medical education would enable him to return to rural practice with knowledge and credentials that could establish similar collaborative approaches in other communities. Elizabeth's decision to accept the administrative position represented a different kind of growth opportunity. Her organizational skills and understanding of collaborative medical practice would enable her to train other young people who could serve as bridges between formal medical education and practical community needs. Her role would involve developing curricula that integrated traditional medical knowledge with the innovative approaches she had helped pioneer. The expansion of their practice required difficult decisions about maintaining the essential characteristics that had made their partnership successful while accommodating the growth and attention that recognition had brought. They established principles that would guide their development. Collaborative decision-making would be preserved, opportunities for individual growth would be supported, and community service would remain the primary motivation for all activities. The physical expansion of the clinic became a symbol of their evolving mission. Robert's architectural plans incorporated spaces for teaching and training while maintaining the intimate atmosphere that had fostered their original partnership. The design included residential facilities for visiting students and medical professionals, conference rooms for educational programs, and specialized treatment areas that could serve as demonstration facilities for new collaborative techniques. Margaret's role evolved to include oversight of the educational components of their expanded practice. Her natural teaching abilities and comprehensive understanding of their methods made her ideally suited to guide others who wanted to implement similar approaches in their own communities. She developed training materials that captured not just the technical aspects of their collaboration, but the underlying philosophy that made it effective. The transformation of Riverside Settlement itself reflected the broader impact of their success. The community that had once been divided by suspicion and resentment had become a destination for medical professionals and educators from across the region. Local businesses thrived as visitors came to study the innovative medical practice, and property values increased as families sought to relocate to a community known for excellent healthcare and educational opportunities. The success of their collaborative approach began attracting families in circumstances similar to those the Hendersons had faced. Riverside Settlement became known as a place where people with limited resources but valuable skills could find opportunities to develop their potential while contributing to community welfare. The auction that had brought the Henderson family to Dr. Hayes was replaced by a more formal but equally compassionate program for connecting struggling families with opportunities for mutual support and growth. William's departure for medical college, when it finally occurred, was celebrated as a graduation rather than a loss. The entire community gathered to recognize his achievements and express confidence in his eventual return as a fully qualified physician who would expand their collaborative practice to serve an even broader region. "I'm not leaving," William told the assembled crowd during the farewell ceremony. "I'm extending our reach to places where our methods can help other communities discover what we've learned here. Everything I accomplish will be built on the foundation you've given me." Elizabeth's assumption of administrative responsibilities for the expanded practice demonstrated how their collaborative approach could adapt to growth while preserving essential characteristics. Her leadership style reflected the same principles of mutual respect and shared decision-making that had made their original partnership successful. The teaching hospital proposal, when finally implemented, created a model for medical education that attracted attention from institutions across the country. Students who trained in Riverside Settlement carried their collaborative methods to practices throughout the region, multiplying the impact of the innovations that had begun with a desperate doctor's impulsive bid at a small-town auction. Margaret's training materials for rural medical assistants were adopted by state health authorities and distributed to communities struggling with limited medical access. Her practical wisdom and systematic approach to collaborative patient care provided frameworks that enabled other partnerships between medical professionals and community members. Robert's architectural innovations influenced the design of medical facilities beyond Riverside Settlement, with his plans serving as models for construction projects that prioritized operational efficiency and collaborative workflow. His integration of practical construction knowledge with medical operational requirements created standards that improved healthcare delivery in rural communities throughout the region. The transformation was complete, yet the fundamental principles remained unchanged. The partnership that had begun with a desperate family's need for survival and a physician's moral conviction had evolved into something that served the broader community while preserving the essential human connections that made their collaboration meaningful. As autumn settled over Riverside Settlement, bringing with it the first anniversary of the Henderson family's arrival, everyone involved recognized that they had participated in something extraordinary. The desperate circumstances that had brought them together had revealed possibilities that none of them had imagined, creating a model for community service, professional collaboration, and social progress that would influence countless lives. In the years to come, 5 years had transformed Riverside Settlement from a struggling backwater community into a beacon of innovation that drew visitors from across the continent. The modest clinic where Dr. Jonathan Hayes had once struggled to treat patients with dwindling supplies had evolved into the Riverside Institute for Collaborative Medicine, a teaching hospital that challenged conventional assumptions about medical, education, and community healthcare. The morning sun cast long shadows across the expanded campus as Dr. William Henderson, now bearing the surname he had chosen to honor both his birth family and the physician who had changed their destiny, completed his rounds in the pediatric wing. At 21, he possessed medical credentials that would have seemed impossible for a carpenter's son. But more importantly, he carried forward the collaborative philosophy that had shaped his understanding of healing from childhood. His white coat bore the distinctive insignia of the Institute, intertwined hands symbolizing the partnership between formal medical training and community wisdom that defined their approach. The design had been Elizabeth's creation, reflecting her artistic sensibilities and her deep understanding of the principles they represented. Dr. Henderson called out Nurse Patricia Williams, a young woman who had graduated from the Institute's innovative training program. The Morrison family is here for Tommy's follow-up examination. He's asking specifically to see you. Tommy Morrison, now 12, had been one of William's first independent patients after his return from medical college. The boy's recovery from a complex bone fracture had demonstrated William's ability to combine advanced surgical techniques with the empathetic communication skills he had learned through years of observing patient care at the original clinic. As William examined Tommy's healed arm, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. Medical college had challenged him in ways he hadn't anticipated, not because of academic difficulty, but because of the stark contrast between institutional approaches and the collaborative methods he had grown up with. His professors had initially been skeptical of his unconventional background, but his clinical performance and innovative thinking had gradually won their respect and interest. "Dr. Henderson," Tommy's mother asked, "is it true that you learned medicine by watching your family work with Dr. Hayes?" The question was one William heard regularly, and he had developed responses that honored both his unique educational path and the value of formal medical training. "I learned that medicine is about more than technical knowledge," he replied. "It's about understanding people, working together, and recognizing that healing happens best when everyone contributes their strengths." In the administrative wing of the Institute, Elizabeth Henderson Morrison, having married the eldest son of the farmer whose workers Dr. Hayes had once treated, was concluding a meeting with representatives from medical colleges in 3 different states. As director of educational programs, she had developed curricula that were being adopted by institutions seeking to incorporate collaborative approaches into their training. The conference room where she conducted these meetings had been designed by her father Robert, whose architectural innovations had influenced medical facility construction throughout the region. His integration of practical workflow considerations with healing environments had created spaces that promoted both efficiency and comfort, challenging traditional institutional designs that prioritized clinical sterility over human connection. "The preliminary results from your pilot programs are remarkable," commented Dr. Sarah Chen from the University Medical Center. "Student satisfaction rates are higher, patient outcomes are improved, and graduates report feeling better prepared for rural practice. How do you maintain quality control while encouraging such individualized approaches to medical education?" Elizabeth's response drew upon years of experience managing the delicate balance between innovation and standards. "We've learned that quality comes from understanding principles rather than following rigid protocols. When students grasp the fundamental goal of serving patient welfare through collaborative effort, they develop judgment that enables them to adapt their approaches to specific circumstances while maintaining professional excellence." Her administrative philosophy reflected lessons learned from her mother, Margaret, whose approach to organizing the original clinic had emphasized flexibility within clear frameworks. Margaret's contributions to rural healthcare had been formally recognized through her appointment as a state consultant on community health initiatives, a position that enabled her to share their methods with struggling communities throughout the region. The evening brought the Institute's monthly community forum, an event that embodied the democratic principles underlying their collaborative approach. In the main auditorium, another of Robert's architectural achievements that fostered inclusive dialogue, residents of Riverside Settlement gathered with medical professionals, students, and visitors to discuss healthcare needs and community development. Dr. Hayes, now bearing the title of Director Emeritus, served as moderator for these forums with the same thoughtful approach that had characterized his medical practice. At 62, he remained actively involved in patient care, but his primary focus had shifted to mentoring young physicians and preserving the essential spirit of collaboration that had made their success possible. Tonight, we're discussing the proposal to establish satellite clinics in neighboring communities, Dr. Hayes announced to the assembled crowd. This represents an opportunity to extend our collaborative approach beyond Riverside Settlement, but it also raises questions about maintaining our standards and values while expanding our reach. The discussion that followed exemplified the inclusive decision-making process that distinguished the Institute from conventional medical institutions. Community members contributed perspectives on regional healthcare needs, medical professionals offered technical expertise, and students provided fresh insights unconstrained by traditional assumptions. Jeremiah Colt, now in his 70s but still actively involved in community affairs, raised a concern that reflected his transformation from skeptic to advocate. We need to ensure that expansion doesn't dilute what makes our approach special. The personal relationships and community connections that enabled our success can't be replicated through bureaucratic procedures. His words carried particular weight because of his history with the Institute and his current role as chairman of the Community Advisory Board. The lumber operation he had once run with harsh efficiency had been restructured as a worker cooperative that provided materials for medical facility construction throughout the region, demonstrating how collaborative principles could transform business practices as well as healthcare delivery. Margaret Henderson, whose contributions to the discussion reflected decades of experience in community health, offered a perspective that balanced expansion opportunities with preservation of core values. Growth is essential if we want to serve more communities, but it must be organic growth that respects local circumstances and builds genuine partnerships rather than imposing external solutions. Her wisdom had been shaped by countless interactions with struggling families and communities that sought to replicate Riverside Settlement's success. Not every attempt had succeeded, but the failures had provided valuable lessons about the conditions necessary for collaborative approaches to take root and flourish. The forum concluded with a decision to proceed cautiously with satellite clinic development, establishing pilot programs that would test their ability to maintain collaborative standards while serving broader geographic areas. The decision-making process itself demonstrated how their democratic principles had evolved to accommodate growth while preserving community input and professional accountability. After the forum, the extended Henderson family gathered in the comfortable living space that Robert had designed above the original clinic. The room served as both private retreat and informal meeting space, where the most important decisions about the Institute's direction were made through family discussions that honored both individual perspectives and collective wisdom. Samuel Henderson, now 9 years old and demonstrating the same intellectual curiosity that had characterized his brother William's childhood, was completing homework that included both traditional academic subjects and practical lessons in community service. His education reflected the Institute's belief that learning should integrate academic knowledge with real-world application and social responsibility. "Uncle Jonathan," Samuel said, using the honorary title that reflected Dr. Hayes's status as an adopted family member, "my teacher wants me to write about what makes our community different from other places. What should I tell her?" Dr. Hayes smiled at the question, recognizing an opportunity to help the next generation understand the principles that had guided their remarkable journey. "Tell her about the auction," he suggested. "Explain how desperate circumstances brought us together and how we discovered that people can accomplish extraordinary things when they're allowed to contribute their unique talents." The conversation that followed became an impromptu lesson in community history that connected past struggles with present achievements and future possibilities. Samuel listened with the same focused attention that his brother had once brought to medical texts, absorbing not just facts, but the underlying values that had shaped their collective success. William arrived later that evening, having completed his hospital duties and the evening rounds that kept him connected to the hands-on patient care that remained the foundation of his medical practice. Despite his advanced education and growing reputation as an innovative physician, he maintained the humble curiosity and collaborative spirit that had characterized his approach to learning from childhood. "I received a letter today from the Medical Society of Philadelphia," William announced, producing an envelope bearing official seals. "They're inviting me to present our collaborative methods at their annual conference. The presentation would reach hundreds of physicians from across the country. The invitation represented recognition at the highest levels of medical authority, validating the innovative approaches that had once been dismissed as unprofessional or inappropriate. More importantly, it offered an opportunity to influence medical education and practice on a national scale, extending the impact of their methods far beyond what they could achieve through regional expansion alone. Elizabeth leaned forward with interest, her administrative experience having taught her to recognize opportunities for strategic influence. What kind of presentation are they requesting? Are they interested in our educational methods, our patient care approaches, or the community partnership aspects? All of it, William replied, his excitement evident despite his attempt to maintain professional composure. They want a comprehensive overview of how collaborative methods can improve medical outcomes while strengthening community connections. It's exactly the kind of platform we've been hoping for to share our message with a broader audience. Dr. Hayes felt a surge of pride that transcended personal satisfaction, recognizing that William's invitation represented vindication of the moral convictions that had driven his impulsive auction bid years earlier. The boy, whose intelligence had caught his attention on that desperate day, had evolved into a physician whose innovations were reshaping medical practice at the highest levels. The discussion about the Philadelphia presentation evolved into a broader conversation about the Institute's future direction and the strategies they would employ to preserve their collaborative principles while expanding their influence. Each family member contributed perspectives shaped by their unique roles and experiences, creating the kind of comprehensive analysis that had characterized their decision-making process from the beginning. Margaret's concerns focused on maintaining authentic community connections as their reputation attracted attention from increasingly distant institutions. We need to remember that our success came from responding to real local needs, not from pursuing national recognition for its own sake. Robert's perspective emphasized the practical challenges of scaling their physical infrastructure to accommodate growth while preserving the intimate atmosphere that fostered collaboration. Bigger isn't always better if it means losing the personal relationships that make our approach effective. Elizabeth's administrative experience provided insights into the complexities of managing expansion while maintaining quality standards. We'll need to develop systems that preserve our collaborative principles while providing the structure necessary for larger-scale operations. Samuel's contribution to the discussion, though limited by his age, reflected the next generation's understanding of their community's values. Will the new places we help become like families too, or will they just be businesses that happen to do medicine? His question captured the essential challenge they faced: how to maintain the family-like bonds that had made their partnership successful while creating professional relationships that could serve broader populations. The question had no easy answers, but it focused their attention on the core values that would guide their growth strategies. As the evening concluded, Dr. Hayes reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment of recognition and opportunity. The desperate circumstances that had driven his auction bid had revealed possibilities that none of them had imagined, creating a model for medical practice and community service that was now influencing institutions across the country. The Henderson family that had once stood on an auction block, reduced to selling their labor for survival, had become leaders in medical innovation and community development. Their individual talents, nurtured through collaborative partnership, had exceeded what any of them could have achieved alone, while creating opportunities for countless others to discover their own potential. William's upcoming presentation in Philadelphia would mark another milestone in their ongoing mission to demonstrate that medicine could be both scientifically rigorous and deeply human, both professionally excellent and community-centered. The boy, who had once asked curious questions about medical instruments, would soon be teaching established physicians how collaboration could enhance their practice and enrich their professional lives. The Riverside Institute for Collaborative Medicine stood as a testament to the transformative power of compassion, courage, and the willingness to challenge conventional assumptions in service of human welfare. What had begun with a desperate doctor's moral conviction had evolved into an institution that embodied new possibilities for healing, learning, and community service. As the family prepared to retire for the evening, each member carrying dreams, shaped by their shared experience and individual aspirations, the legacy of that long-ago auction continued to unfold. The desperate circumstances that had once threatened to destroy a family had instead created a foundation for innovations that would influence medical practice and community development for generations to come. Centered approach. The senator's initial skepticism was evident from his first question during the formal presentation. "Dr. Hayes, your results are impressive, but how do we know these outcomes aren't simply the result of selection bias? Perhaps Riverside Settlement attracts healthier populations or more motivated patients than typical rural communities." Dr. Hayes had anticipated such questions and prepared comprehensive data that addressed methodological concerns while highlighting the systematic nature of their improvements. Senator Thornfield, "Our patient population reflects the same demographic and health challenges found throughout rural America. The difference lies not in who we serve, but in how we serve them." The presentation that followed included detailed comparisons with similar communities, statistical analyses controlling for various demographic factors, and longitudinal studies tracking health outcomes over multiple years. More importantly, it featured testimonials from patients, families, and community members who could speak directly to the impact of collaborative healthcare on their lives. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, now in her 70s and serving as the unofficial historian of Riverside Settlement's transformation, addressed the congressional delegation with the kind of direct honesty that politicians rarely encountered. "Senator, I've lived here for 50 years, through good times and bad. Before Dr. Hayes and the Henderson family arrived, people died from things that shouldn't have killed them. Children went without proper medical care because their families couldn't afford it. Old folks like me suffered in silence because we thought that's just how things were supposed to be." She paused, her weathered hands gripping the podium with determination. "These people didn't just bring better medicine to our community. They brought hope. They showed us that we didn't have to accept suffering as inevitable, that we had knowledge and skills that could contribute to our own healing. That's not something you can measure with statistics, but it's something that changes everything." The delegation's visit extended beyond formal presentations to include hands-on observation of the Institute's operations. Senator Thornfield accompanied William on hospital rounds, observing how collaborative decision-making played out in actual patient care situations. He witnessed family conferences where medical professionals, patients, and community members worked together to develop treatment plans that addressed not just medical symptoms, but social and economic factors that influenced health outcomes. During one particularly complex case involving an elderly farmer with multiple chronic conditions, the senator observed how the collaborative approach produced solutions that individual expertise alone might have missed. The patient's daughter provided crucial information about his daily routines and medication compliance. A local pharmacist offered insights about drug interactions that hadn't been considered. A neighboring farmer suggested modifications to work routines that could reduce physical stress while maintaining the patient's sense of purpose and productivity. "This is remarkable," Senator Thornfield admitted to Dr. Hayes after the conference. I've never seen medical decision-making that so thoroughly integrates clinical expertise with practical wisdom. How do you train people to work together effectively? The question led to extensive discussions about educational methods, institutional culture, and the systematic approaches the Institute had developed for fostering collaborative relationships. Elizabeth's training programs became a particular focus of congressional interest, as legislators recognized that scaling collaborative approaches would require educational innovations that could be implemented in diverse settings. Representative Sarah Mitchell, a former teacher who served on the Education Subcommittee, was particularly intrigued by Samuel's educational experience. This child is receiving an education that integrates academic learning with practical skills and community service in ways that our formal education system rarely achieves. What can we learn from this approach that might inform broader educational policy? Samuel, now articulate beyond his years and comfortable with adult conversations about complex topics, responded to the representative's questions with insights that reflected both his individual intelligence and the collaborative values that had shaped his development. I think the difference is that I'm learning how things actually work, not just what books say about them. When I study mathematics, I use it to help calculate medication doses. When I read history, I connect it to the stories of families in our community. Everything fits together instead of being separate subjects. His response captured something essential about the Institute's educational philosophy that had implications extending far beyond medical training. The integration of theoretical knowledge with practical application, individual achievement with community service, and academic excellence with social responsibility represented an approach to learning that could transform educational institutions. Throughout the country, the congressional delegation's visit concluded with recommendations that surprised everyone involved. Rather than proposing federal oversight or bureaucratic integration of collaborative methods, Senator Thornfield's committee recommended substantial funding for pilot programs that would allow communities to develop their own versions of collaborative healthcare while maintaining local autonomy and flexibility. What we've seen here can't be replicated through top-down mandates or standardized procedures, Senator Thornfield explained during his final press conference. It emerges from genuine community relationships and shared commitment to collective welfare. Our role should be to provide resources and support, not direction and control. The federal funding that resulted from the congressional visit enabled the Institute to establish a national network of collaborative healthcare initiatives without compromising the local autonomy that had made their original success possible. Communities across the country began developing their own versions of collaborative medicine, adapting the principles to their specific circumstances while sharing experiences and innovations through the network. William found himself at the center of this national movement, traveling to communities that were implementing collaborative approaches and learning how different cultural contexts and geographic circumstances influenced the application of their methods. Each visit provided new insights that enriched his understanding of medicine and deepened his appreciation for the diversity of human responses to health challenges. In urban communities, collaborative approaches often focused on addressing social determinants of health that rural areas might not face: environmental toxins, housing instability, food insecurity, and social isolation. The solutions required different kinds of partnerships, involving community organizations, social services, and advocacy groups, alongside traditional medical providers. A visit to Detroit revealed how collaborative principles could transform healthcare delivery in post-industrial communities struggling with economic decline and population loss. Local residents had developed innovative approaches to community health that combined medical expertise with grassroots organizing, creating neighborhood health councils that addressed everything from nutrition education to environmental justice. "What you've accomplished in Riverside Settlement inspired us," explained Dr. Janet Washington, who led the Detroit initiative. "But we had to adapt your methods to urban realities. Our collaborative teams include social workers, community activists, and environmental health specialists alongside medical professionals. The principles are the same, but the applications reflect our specific challenges and resources. Similar adaptations were occurring in communities throughout the country, creating a rich tapestry of collaborative healthcare innovations that demonstrated the flexibility and universal applicability of their core principles." Mountain communities developed collaborative approaches that addressed the unique challenges of geographic isolation and seasonal employment. Coastal areas created programs that integrated traditional maritime culture with modern medical practice. Agricultural regions established systems that connected farm safety with family health and community wellness. Elizabeth's role evolved to include coordination of this national network, requiring administrative skills that had grown far beyond her original inventory management responsibilities. She developed communication systems that enabled communities to share innovations and challenges, training programs that prepared facilitators for collaborative healthcare initiatives, and evaluation methods that documented outcomes while respecting local autonomy. The network's annual conference became a gathering point for hundreds of healthcare professionals, community leaders, and advocates who were working to implement collaborative approaches in their own settings. The conference rotated between different communities, allowing participants to observe various models of collaborative healthcare while strengthening connections between geographically distant initiatives. Margaret's contributions to these conferences reflected her evolution from local healthcare provider to national consultant on community-integrated medical practice. Her presentations on family dynamics in collaborative healthcare addressed challenges that were emerging as their methods spread to communities with different cultural traditions and social structures. "Collaboration requires trust," she explained to conference participants, "and trust develops differently in different communities. Rural communities like ours often have long-standing relationships that can be built upon, but urban areas might need to create new forms of connection. The key is understanding how trust develops in specific contexts and building collaborative structures that honor those patterns." Robert's architectural innovations had also gained national attention, influencing the design of medical facilities throughout the country. His principles of creating spaces that promoted collaboration rather than hierarchy were being incorporated into hospital construction projects, clinic renovations, and medical school buildings that embodied collaborative values in their physical structure. His latest project involved designing a new type of community health center that could serve as a model for federal health initiatives. The design integrated medical services with social services, educational programs, and community meeting spaces, creating a facility that addressed health in its broadest sense while maintaining the intimate scale that fostered personal relationships. "Architecture shapes behavior," Robert explained to a gathering of hospital administrators and public health officials. "If we want healthcare providers to collaborate with communities, we need to create spaces that make such collaboration natural and comfortable. Traditional medical facilities often isolate providers from the communities they serve. We need designs that bring them together." The success of their collaborative model had also attracted attention from international healthcare organizations, interested in adapting their methods to different national contexts. Delegations from Canada, Australia, and several European countries visited Riverside Settlement to study their approaches and explore potential applications in their own healthcare systems. Dr. Lars Andersen from the Danish Ministry of Health was particularly interested in how collaborative methods might enhance Denmark's already progressive healthcare system. "We have universal coverage and excellent medical outcomes," he explained, "but we're recognizing that we could improve patient satisfaction and community engagement by incorporating more collaborative approaches into our delivery methods." These international exchanges provided opportunities for the Institute to learn from healthcare innovations in other countries, while sharing their own methods with global audiences. William participated in several international conferences that explored how collaborative principles could address universal challenges in healthcare delivery, from aging populations to chronic disease management to health equity. The global perspective that emerged from these exchanges revealed that while specific applications varied widely, the fundamental principles of collaborative healthcare, mutual respect, shared decision-making, and integration of diverse expertise resonated across cultural and national boundaries. Communities throughout the world were discovering that effective healthcare required more than technical medical knowledge. It required understanding of local contexts, respect for community wisdom, and commitment to collective welfare. Samuel's education continued to serve as a living laboratory for testing educational innovations that integrated global awareness with local commitment. By age 12, he was corresponding with young people in communities throughout the collaborative healthcare network, learning about different approaches to community service, while deepening his understanding of the universal principles that connected their diverse efforts. His school projects often involved comparative studies of healthcare challenges and solutions in different communities, developing analytical skills that prepared him for future leadership roles while maintaining his connection to Riverside Settlement's specific needs and opportunities. Whether he eventually chose medicine, education, policy work, or some other field of service, his educational experience was preparing him to contribute meaningfully to collaborative approaches to community welfare. Dr. Hayes, now in his 70s, and serving primarily as an elder statesman and mentor, reflected often on how their local experiment had evolved into a national movement that was influencing healthcare policy and practice at the highest levels. The impulsive auction bid that had seemed like a moment of personal moral conviction had become the catalyst for systematic changes in how American communities approached health and healing. His correspondence with former students and visiting professionals provided ongoing insights into the challenges and successes of implementing collaborative methods in diverse settings. Each letter brought news of innovations, adaptations, and outcomes that validated the principles they had discovered while revealing new applications they had never imagined. A letter from Dr. Maria Santos, who had established a collaborative healthcare program in a predominantly Latino community in California, exemplified the kinds of cultural adaptations that were emerging throughout the network. "We've incorporated traditional healing practices alongside modern medicine," she wrote, "and we've found that this integration actually improves treatment outcomes while strengthening community connections. The collaborative approach you developed has given us a framework for honoring our cultural traditions while accessing the best of contemporary medical practice." Similar letters arrived from healthcare providers working in Native American communities, African American urban neighborhoods, immigrant communities, and rural areas with different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. Each community had adapted collaborative principles to reflect their specific traditions and needs, creating a rich diversity of applications that demonstrated the universal relevance of their core insights. The network's research initiatives. began producing peer-reviewed studies that documented the effectiveness of collaborative approaches across diverse populations and healthcare challenges. These studies provided the scientific validation necessary for broader adoption of collaborative methods, while maintaining the flexibility and community autonomy that made such approaches effective. Dr. Patricia Kim, a researcher from Johns Hopkins, who had spent a year studying the network's outcomes, published findings that attracted international attention. Collaborative healthcare approaches consistently produce better health outcomes, higher patient satisfaction, and lower costs than traditional medical delivery methods, her research concluded. More importantly, they strengthen community social capital and enhance collective capacity for addressing health challenges. The research validation enabled the Institute to secure additional funding for expansion while maintaining their commitment to community-centered approaches. Federal agencies, private foundations, and healthcare organizations began providing support for collaborative initiatives that honored local autonomy while contributing to broader understanding of effective healthcare delivery. The 15th anniversary of the Henderson family's arrival in Riverside Settlement was marked by the publication of a comprehensive book documenting their journey and its implications for healthcare policy and practice. From auction block to healing community, the Riverside story became required reading in medical schools, public health programs, and policy studies courses throughout the country. The book's co-authors, Dr. Hayes, William, Elizabeth, Margaret, and Robert, each contributed perspectives that captured different aspects of their collaborative journey. Dr. Hayes wrote about the medical and professional dimensions of their innovations. William addressed the educational and training implications. Elizabeth focused on administrative and organizational aspects. Margaret explored family and community dynamics. Robert examined the physical and environmental factors that supported collaboration. Together, their voices created a comprehensive account that honored both the personal relationships that had made their success possible and the systematic innovations that had enabled their methods to be adapted by other communities. The book became a bridge between their specific story and the broader movement for collaborative healthcare that was transforming American medical practice. Samuel, now 13 and demonstrating increasing sophistication in his understanding of community leadership and social change, contributed a final chapter that looked forward to the next generation's role in continuing the collaborative healthcare movement. His writing reflected both the wisdom he had absorbed from years of observing collaborative decision-making and his own emerging vision for how their principles might address future challenges. The auction that brought my family to Riverside. Settlement happened because people were desperate and had nowhere else to turn, he wrote. But what we've built here shows that desperate circumstances don't have to lead to despair. When people work together with respect and shared purpose, they can create solutions that none of them could achieve alone. My generation's job is to carry these lessons forward to address whatever challenges the future brings. His words captured something essential about the legacy they had created, not just a successful healthcare program or innovative medical practice, but a demonstration of human possibility that would continue inspiring communities long after the original participants had passed from the scene. The desperate doctor's choice had indeed shocked the whole settlement, but not in the way anyone had initially expected. Instead of scandal or failure, his decision had created a legacy of hope, innovation, and collaborative service that would continue inspiring communities for generations to come. The 20th anniversary of the Henderson family's arrival marked a watershed moment in the evolution of collaborative healthcare. What had begun as a local experiment had become a global movement, with collaborative healthcare networks operating on every continent and influencing policy at the highest levels of international health organizations. The World Health Organization's invitation to present at their annual assembly in Geneva represented the ultimate validation of principles that had once been dismissed as unprofessional and inappropriate. Dr. William Henderson, now 31 and recognized as one of the leading innovators in community-integrated medicine, stood before delegates from 194 countries to share lessons learned from 2 decades of collaborative healthcare practice. Distinguished delegates, William began, his voice carrying the confidence that came from years of transforming lives through collaborative medicine. I come before you not as a representative of any government or institution, but as someone whose life was transformed by the power of collaboration to address human suffering and promote community wellness. His presentation traced the evolution of collaborative healthcare from its origins in a desperate auction to its current status, as a recognized methodology for addressing complex health challenges. But the most powerful moments came when he shared specific examples of how collaborative approaches had addressed health crises that traditional medical interventions had failed to resolve. The story of the Riverside Settlement's response to a severe influenza outbreak 5 years earlier exemplified how collaborative methods could enhance traditional public health measures. When the outbreak threatened to overwhelm conventional medical resources, the community's collaborative healthcare network had mobilized resources that went far beyond clinical treatment. Local teachers had coordinated home education programs for quarantined families. Agricultural workers had organized food delivery systems for isolated households. Business owners had modified work schedules to reduce transmission risks while maintaining economic stability. Religious leaders had provided emotional support through virtual services and personal counseling. The result was not just successful disease containment, but strengthened community resilience that enhanced long-term health outcomes. This integrated response was possible because our community had spent years developing collaborative relationships that could be activated during crises, William explained to the WHO Assembly. The medical intervention was essential, but it was the community's capacity for coordinated action that prevented the outbreak from becoming a catastrophe. Similar examples from collaborative healthcare networks throughout the world demonstrated how their principles had been adapted to address diverse health challenges. In Bangladesh, collaborative approaches had improved maternal health outcomes by integrating traditional birth attendants with trained medical professionals. In Brazil, community health workers had collaborated with physicians to address tuberculosis in urban slums. In Kenya, collaborative networks had enhanced HIV prevention and treatment by combining medical expertise with community education and support. Each adaptation reflected local circumstances and cultural contexts, but all shared the fundamental principle that effective healthcare required integration of professional medical knowledge with community wisdom and resources. The WHO presentation concluded with recommendations for incorporating collaborative approaches into international health development programs while respecting local autonomy and cultural traditions. Dr. Margaret Chen, who had succeeded Dr. Tedros as WHO Director General, responded to William's presentation with commitments that would reshape international health policy. The evidence you've presented demonstrates that collaborative healthcare approaches represent our best hope for achieving universal health coverage and addressing persistent health inequities. The WHO will establish a new initiative to support collaborative healthcare development while respecting national sovereignty and cultural diversity. The international recognition brought new responsibilities and opportunities that tested the network's ability to maintain its core values while expanding its global influence. Elizabeth, now 35 and serving as executive director of the International Collaborative Healthcare Network, found herself coordinating programs that spanned 6 continents while ensuring that growth didn't compromise the personal relationships and community connections that made collaborative approaches effective. Her administrative headquarters remained in Riverside Settlement, but her work increasingly involved virtual coordination of diverse initiatives that required sophisticated understanding of cultural differences, political contexts, and economic realities. The challenge was maintaining the intimate personal character of collaborative healthcare while managing a global network that served millions of people. The solution emerged through the same collaborative decision-making processes that had guided their development from the beginning. Rather than creating a centralized bureaucracy that could control global operations, Elizabeth and her team developed a network structure that preserved local autonomy while facilitating communication and resource sharing between collaborative healthcare initiatives worldwide. Regional coordinators, typically individuals who had trained at Riverside Settlement or similar facilities, served as liaisons between local programs and the global network. These coordinators facilitated knowledge sharing, provided technical assistance, and helped communities adapt collaborative principles to their specific circumstances without imposing standardized procedures or external requirements. Margaret Henderson, now in her 60s and recognized as a leading authority on community-integrated health promotion, found herself increasingly involved in training these regional coordinators. Her role had evolved from local healthcare provider to global consultant on collaborative methods, but her approach remained grounded in the practical wisdom and genuine care for individuals that had characterized her original contributions to the Riverside Settlement Clinic. "Collaboration can't be taught through manuals or lectures," she explained to a gathering of regional coordinators from 15 countries. "It emerges from genuine relationships built through shared work and mutual respect. Our job isn't to export our specific methods, but to help communities discover their own capacity for collaborative problem-solving." Her training programs emphasized principles rather than procedures, focusing on relationship-building skills, conflict resolution methods, and communication techniques that could be adapted to diverse cultural contexts. The most effective regional coordinators were typically those who combined technical knowledge with deep understanding of their local communities and strong commitment to collaborative values. Robert Henderson's architectural innovations had also achieved global recognition, influencing the design of healthcare facilities throughout the world. His principles of creating spaces that promoted collaboration rather than hierarchy had been incorporated into major hospital construction projects on every continent, from state-of-the-art medical centers in developed countries to community health clinics in rural areas of developing nations. His latest project involved designing prototype healthcare facilities that could be adapted to different geographic and economic contexts while maintaining the spatial relationships that fostered collaborative practice. These modular designs enabled communities with limited resources to create effective healthcare environments while providing templates that could be scaled up for larger facilities. Samuel Henderson, now 21, and completing his final year of medical school, represented the next generation's approach to collaborative healthcare. His education had integrated the best of traditional medical training with deep grounding in collaborative principles, preparing him to carry forward the family legacy while adapting it to emerging challenges and opportunities. His medical school thesis examined how collaborative healthcare approaches could address the mental health crisis that was affecting communities throughout the world. His research demonstrated that collaborative methods were particularly effective for mental health treatment because they addressed social isolation, community disconnection, and lack of meaningful purpose that often contributed to psychological distress. Mental health isn't just an individual medical problem, Samuel argued in his thesis presentation. It's often a reflection of community health and social relationships, collaborative approaches that strengthen community connections and provide opportunities for meaningful contribution can be more effective than individual therapy or medication alone. His research had involved extensive fieldwork in collaborative healthcare networks throughout the United States and internationally, documenting how different communities had developed mental health programs that integrated professional treatment with peer support, community service opportunities, and social connection initiatives. The thesis attracted attention from mental health professionals and policymakers who were struggling to address rising rates of depression, anxiety, and social isolation in both developed and developing countries. Samuel's findings suggested that collaborative healthcare approaches could provide cost-effective, culturally appropriate solutions that addressed root causes rather than just treating symptoms. Dr. Hayes, now 82 and serving as professor emeritus at the Institute, spent much of his time mentoring young physicians who came to Riverside Settlement to learn collaborative methods. His age and experience had given him a unique perspective on the evolution of their movement and the challenges facing the next generation of collaborative healthcare practitioners. His memoir, The Auction That Changed Everything, Reflections on a Life in Collaborative Medicine, had become a classic text in medical humanities courses, providing personal insights into the development of collaborative healthcare while exploring broader questions about professional purpose, social responsibility, and the meaning of healing. "I've lived long enough to see our local experiment become a global movement," he wrote in the memoir's final chapter. "But the most important lesson I've learned is that success isn't measured by the scale of your influence, but by the depth of your relationships and the authenticity of your service. The Henderson family taught me that healing happens through connection, not just intervention." His weekly seminars for visiting medical students had become legendary throughout the global collaborative healthcare network. These informal gatherings combined case discussions with philosophical exploration of what it meant to practice medicine in service of community welfare. Students left these seminars with technical knowledge, but more importantly, with transformed understanding of their professional responsibilities and opportunities. The 25th anniversary celebration drew more than 5,000 people to Riverside Settlement, requiring temporary facilities and housing that showcased the community's continued capacity for collaborative problem-solving. Visitors from every collaborative healthcare network in the world gathered to celebrate achievements while planning for future challenges and opportunities. The celebration's highlight was the dedication of the Henderson Family Global Center for Collaborative Healthcare, a new facility that would serve as headquarters for international network coordination, while providing advanced training opportunities for collaborative healthcare practitioners from around the world. The center's design, created by Robert in collaboration with architects from 12 countries, embodied collaborative principles in its very structure. The building integrated spaces for education, research, community meetings, and clinical practice, creating an environment where theoretical learning, practical application, and community engagement could occur simultaneously. Elizabeth's speech at the dedication ceremony reflected on the journey from auction block to global influence, while emphasizing the continuing importance of local relationships and community connections. This building represents our commitment to sharing what we've learned, while remaining grounded in the community relationships that made our success possible. We're expanding our reach, but not abandoning our roots. William's address focused on the challenges facing collaborative healthcare in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. Climate change, technological advancement, political instability, and economic inequality were creating health challenges that required new forms of collaboration and innovation. The next 25 years will test our movement in ways we can't yet imagine, he told the assembled delegates. But if we stay true to our core principles, mutual respect, shared decision-making, and integration of diverse expertise, we can address whatever challenges arise. The key is maintaining our commitment to collaboration while adapting our methods to changing circumstances. Margaret's remarks emphasized the importance of preserving the human scale and personal relationships that made collaborative approaches effective even as the movement achieved global scope. Success can be dangerous if it leads us to forget why we started this work. We began with a family in desperate circumstances who found hope through genuine human connection. That must remain at the center of everything we do. Robert spoke about the physical environments that supported collaborative culture and the importance of creating spaces that brought people together rather than separating them. Architecture shapes behavior, and behavior shapes communities. If we want collaborative healthcare to flourish, we need to create built environments that make collaboration natural and comfortable. Samuel, representing the next generation of collaborative healthcare practitioners, addressed the technological and social changes that would influence future development of their movement. Artificial intelligence, telemedicine, genetic therapy, and other advances offered new tools for addressing health challenges, but they also raised questions about maintaining human connection and community relationships in an increasingly digital world. Technology should enhance collaboration, not replace it, Samuel argued. The challenge for my generation is learning to use new tools in ways that strengthen rather than weaken the human relationships that make healing possible. We need to be thoughtful about how we integrate technological advances with collaborative principles. The anniversary celebration concluded with the announcement of new initiatives that would extend collaborative healthcare approaches to address emerging global challenges. Climate change adaptation programs would help communities develop health, resilience in the face of environmental disruption. Technology integration projects would explore how digital tools could enhance rather than replace human collaboration. Youth leadership development programs would prepare the next generation for collaborative healthcare leadership. But perhaps the most significant announcement was the establishment of the Henderson Family Endowment, a permanent funding source that would ensure the continuation of collaborative healthcare development while preserving the values and principles that had made their success possible. The endowment would support community-based collaborative healthcare initiatives while maintaining local autonomy and cultural sensitivity. As the 25th anniversary celebration concluded and visitors began returning to their home communities, throughout the world, the extended Henderson family gathered once more in the comfortable living space above the original clinic. The room had witnessed countless discussions that shaped not just their personal decisions, but the direction of a global movement that was influencing healthcare practice on every continent. The conversation that evening ranged across decades of shared experience and generations of future possibility. They discussed specific challenges facing collaborative healthcare networks in different parts of the world, strategic decisions about resource allocation and program development, and philosophical questions about maintaining their movement's integrity while adapting to changing circumstances. But underlying all these practical considerations was a deeper recognition of what they had accomplished together and what it meant for the future of human health and community welfare. The desperate circumstances that had brought them together at an auction 25 years earlier had revealed possibilities that none of them had imagined, creating a model for community service, professional collaboration, and social progress that was now influencing the lives of millions of people throughout the world. Dr. Hayes, listening to the family discussion with the satisfaction that came from a life well lived and work well done, reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a moment of moral conviction and evolved into a global movement for collaborative healthcare. The auction that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, not just for the Henderson family, but for communities throughout the world that were discovering new possibilities for addressing health challenges through collaborative action. The story that had begun with desperate circumstances would continue through future generations, carried forward by individuals and communities who understood that healing happens through connection, that wisdom emerges through collaboration, and that the most extraordinary achievements often grow from the most ordinary acts of compassion and courage. In Riverside Settlement, where an auction block had once symbolized desperation and social division, a global center for collaborative healthcare now stood as a beacon of possibility, demonstrating that when people work together with mutual respect and shared purpose, they can transform not just their own circumstances, but the entire world's approach to health, healing, and human flourishing. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.